Now, I know this is a bit mean, given how much chocolate our kids are still munching through after yesterday, but we do need to talk about our childhood obesity pandemic. Teachers at the NASUWT have expressed concern that classrooms are no longer fit for purpose because of the growing number of, well, growing children, with the weight of a 14-year-old male student increasing from an average of 5 stone 10 pounds in 1970 to 8 stone 5 today. According to one of the leaders of the Teachers' Union. The average height is also said to have risen in the past 50 years from 4'10" to 5'8". So the worry is that classrooms are not equipped to contain these ever-growing kids that are just getting bigger and bigger. We've got little flimsy plastic chairs. We've got classroom sizes made up of more than 30 kids. So what do we do about this? Whose responsibility is it? Should we be changing the infrastructure of the classroom to accommodate the children or doing something else? Jo?
Well, I'm very dubious about these figures because that suggests that a 14-year-old boy, the average height has increased by a foot.
No, I think that's wrong, actually. I do apologise. The height thing wasn't right, but the weight is definitely the case. I think that height was more...
No, that is what she said. The average height is also said to have risen in the past 50 years from 4'10" to 5'8".
But I think that might be the average height of an adult, I wonder.
Maybe.
Yeah. Sorry about this.
Sorry.
As a listener as well. We do like to get our facts right here.
But
I think you're absolutely right.
You know, I think there is a real problem about childhood obesity. There is no doubt about it. I haven't been inside, and we're talking about secondary schools, if we're talking about 14-year-old boys, I haven't been inside a secondary school apart from a school hall for a very, very long time. So I don't feel able to talk about the quality of the furniture or the desks, but I suspect they're a lot better than when I was at school about 500 years ago. We still had inkwells, but we didn't have the quill pen. And primary schools, I know, as any parent's ever been to a primary school, you do sit on those. And if you ever want to go to the loo, you think, oh, I'm never going to get up again. So there's all of that going on. But the wider issue is, yes, of course, anybody should be able to be comfortable where they're working, learning, doing everything else. But we can't keep accommodating obesity because we're not dealing with the problem. And the problem is going to get a lot worse because COVID, we know, kids trapped indoors, eating a lot at home, comfort eating, not getting out, not getting in exercise, and so on and so forth. But the cost of living crisis is going to make it even worse. We know that 1 in 10 families are now using food banks. We know that it's only going to get worse, and as we move on into the autumn and winter of next year, it's going to get worse still. Saturated fats, processed foods, lack of availability to fresh fruit and veg, lack of cooking facilities in bad housing.
So some would say, though, if you're eating in food banks, your children are going to be underweight. But that's not what the statistics bear out, Lisa, is it? Why?
No. I mean, this is, to be honest, health inequalities, it's always been a class issue in this country. When I was young, children were underweight because we didn't have access to, probably the amounts of food that kids have today. But we can't just go on what was happening 50 years ago, because what is happening now is the cheapest food are the processed food. The cheapest food is
the high carbohydrate, high sugar.
Yeah. And that's actually the stuff that parents will give their kids to fill them up.
I know.
Because if you haven't got a lot of money, anybody knows now, it's fruit, vegetables, eggs, these are not cheap. These are not cheap foods now.
I would say that in some ways, I'm interested to hear what you've got to think, you say about this, Ben, but in some ways they're not the cheapest foods. I'm going to do that awful kind of, that awful sort of middle-class woman thing here where I say, yes, but it's quite cheap to make a homemade vegetable soup and give your children oats for porridge. That's quite cheap. But I know it's more complicated than that.
Well, it is, but also, I always refer to George Orwell on this point, because this is an issue that has been with us for a long, long time. And in 1931, in Road to Wigan Pier, George Orwell wrote about this same sort of middle-class view of the working class. Well, if they didn't spend all their money on coal or, the working class eat too much sugar, that's what the Daily Mail was saying in 1931. The working class eat too much sugar and, they spend too much money on coal. And the argument that George Orwell made then, and I make now, and continue to make, is when you have got a rotten life, a bit of sugar in your tea will cheer you up.
But the trouble is, no one's having a bit of sugar in their tea.
No, but
now,
whatever it is, but the sugar in the 1930s was the equivalent, perhaps, to the pizza today, you know, or the high-fat cake or whatever. It's comforting.
But your point, Beverly, about the, you know, and I completely agree with you. It's ever so easy to go and make a vegetable soup.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting at a conference about food poverty many years ago and said porridge. And a woman sitting next to me said, that's a terribly middle-class concept.
I know it is.
Yeah, it is.
But
it
it's
really
not.
Is.
But then it shouldn't be.
Food.
It shouldn't be.
No,
I was
it
raised with my working-class mum making vegetable
porridge.
soups and porridge and home, and we had cakes, but she did homemade cakes.
Yeah,
we didn't have them every day. We just had them every now and
If you
again.
haven't got the facilities because you're living in a bedsit,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, there's only so much. Let's suppose you're in a bedsit that's damp, horrible, you can't afford to heat it, you're trying to make porridge with a kettle.
No.
You know, that's...
But then there's also there's that but the thing is now is there are alternatives to porridge or whatever. Whereas when I was a kid, you know, we didn't have the alternative. You know, there was not lots of biscuits. You couldn't go in my fridge without my mum saying that you were allowed to go into it.
Yeah.
You know, you were eating whatever you was given, and that was it.
Absolutely.
And there wasn't a cake drawer or whatever. Whereas now, you know, you have to look at the manufacturers as well.
Oh, yeah.
And the way that they, you know, food is sort of pushed on people. So, you know, this is a much bigger issue that has been with us a long time.
Yeah. Ben.
Yeah, well, I mean, I completely agree. Nutrition is a class issue, and it's always been a class issue. It's manifesting itself now more in obesity than it is being an underfed and, you know, malnutritioned, if you like. But funny enough, I think we're going to see quite a correction in the next few years. What we're seeing now with the Ukraine war, with Russia, with the breakdown of global trading, which is effectively what's happening as we challenge Russia and Russia sides more with China, and we have this global reordering. I think we're going to find that we will suffer inflation. Inflation's going to be endemic for a while, and we're going to get back more of the, if you like, traditional problems associated with malnutrition in the more hard up.
Well, we
working
already
classes.
have that. You know, we already have a generation of children who are full and overweight, but malnourished.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, you
Yeah.
can be both at the same
You
time.
can
which
be
is
all
very
of
sad.
the above,
Yeah.
which is the worst case
But the
scenario.
one thing I would like, it's not all negative, you know, because I think there is some truth in the height figures. And I think over 40 years, we have seen an overall improvement in the United Kingdom. One of the reasons these children are big is not just obesity. Some of them are just big. I remember going back to my old school about 10 years ago and meeting the first 15, and they looked like they could play for England. And when I was at school, you know, we were all just little boys.
But isn't that because we are consuming as many calories, these kids are consuming as a number of calories by the age of 15 that we would have traditionally done maybe by the age of 18, 19, that our human bodies are capable of processing. So we're growing taller, but with that comes the diabetes, with organ problems.
Teeth.
Teeth.
And we've got no dentist, which is a thing
Absolutely.
I'm really...
I mean, there is also the whole thing about...
Just sorry, Joe, 1 second. I just want to bring in our viewers. So Nick has messaged to say the problem with obesity is the parents are not caring for their children. They're failing their children and have been even before food poverty. I would say that these parents aren't overfeeding their children to be unkind. They're doing it because they can't say no. They're doing it out of love.
When did we not have
complex
food
problem.
poverty, though? Can we just clarify that? When did we not have food poverty?
No, we've never
because
not had it.
because it has been with me all of my life.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
my mother's life and my grandmother's life.
Yeah.
But it sort of goes back to what Lisa was saying earlier, which is the George Orwell thing, which is, you know, this idea of treating, you know, it goes in with the sort of because you're worth it, treat yourself, whether it's a bar of chocolate or this. And so parents who are busy, who are stressed, pressured, maybe can't afford the big
Feeling
things.
guilty, working long hours.
Exactly. Can't afford to go to Disneyland, but here's a packet of crisps and a box of chocolates, or let's get a pizza. There's all of that food is not regarded, and I'm not sure that it ever has been properly in this country. It is not regarded with the due respect that countries like Italy, a poor country that learnt to make the best food in the world and make a little bit go a long way.
We don't have that food culture. We did a poll, actually, and thank you to everybody on Twitter who voted on that. And we were talking about whether classrooms should be revamped to accommodate these larger children. That was our poll right there. 14% of you said yes. this. And 86% of you said, no, we shouldn't be changing the classrooms. We didn't ask you what you think we should do, and no doubt you can still get in touch with us and make suggestions. I imagine what a lot of you will say, and I feel this myself, is that the responsibility lies with the parents. Children can only eat what we give them.
Yeah, but look at school dinners. I mean, let's take this back to the classroom. Look at school dinners. Got rid of by previous governments. So actually what they get is processed rubbish. It's not cooked on site.
Well, I would say also it's about choice, isn't it? We've got this idea that we've got to give kids choice.
Well, I would argue much deeper than that, because what I'm really, what do we want a good society to be? And I think this goes back to what we were thinking earlier about Rwanda. What people sit in a room and go, these are all great ideas. They are not people, and I'm going to say it, they are people that have been the most highly educated people in the country, that are the most disconnected from people's lives.
Absolutely.
Some are sitting in rooms and going, I know, this is a great idea. Oh, we'll get rid of school playing fields. Oh, yeah, we'll do, and they never understand the connection that these things happen.
And the money that's been spent on obesity
campaigns honestly
over the years. But it took Marcus Rashford, a young footballer, to make the government see sense about free school meals for kids who were forced out of school because of COVID lockdown.
I honestly think it's time. This is not just about obesity or Rwanda or any of the stories that we talk about, because I am losing my temper at the moment, because I know that there are people sat in a room being paid who knows how much money, being educated in the best schools and universities in the world, and are doing the worst job possible. And I am, how are we going to hold these people to account?
It feels, Ben, as well, though, like this is something that it's quite interesting to look back, because we've seen, all of us in our lifetime have seen this quite spectacular change with children's health, deteriorating children's health. And it kind of started in the 80s in America, where they introduced the low-fat diet. Very clever deception, because actually good, healthy fat is good for you, right? I have full-fat butter, I have full-fat milk, but I just don't have it all. I don't have as much as I want of it.
But I think it is a class issue, and part of it is education. I don't believe for a second that comment from your viewer that parents don't care about their children. I think that's nonsense. It's about knowing what is the right thing to do, having the ability to deliver what's right for your children, which is a privilege. Most people are living from hand to mouth. And if Boris Johnson is really serious about levelling up the country, one of the things he needs to tackle...
That's another one, levelling up.
Is this very basic understanding of what is good and bad for you. I'm completely against the nanny state, which Boris Johnson has upgraded. I call a wet nurse now. I think, we're absolutely all mollycoddled to the point that we can't exercise our own free will. But I think people need to know what is healthy, what is unhealthy, what's the best way to live, what is a cost-effective way to feed yourself and remain healthy. And none of these things are given priority in the United Kingdom. And if Boris Johnson is really serious about levelling up, actually that's a really good place to start.
Yeah.